Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. We will get started in just a couple minutes, so let me get everything set up on our end. Bring Riley up here. Okay, awesome. All right. Hey, Riley.
Hey, Zach.
Awesome. Great. We're here. People are joining. We'll give it a couple minutes. Let folks trickle in. We'll get started at, 4 or 5 minutes after the hour here, probably. But yeah, how's everything going, Riley?
It's going good. Normally, I'm more than happy to start 4 or 5 minutes after, but I'm like, we could use almost every minute we've got here.
Yeah, there is a lot of content to get through. This was a fun one to put together because a lot has happened in the last year in the digital identity space, and a lot is going to happen next year, maybe even more than this year. So, um, there is a lot of action to get into. Yeah, I think we could just get started. And then I think there's already a number of people here and we will share out, as always, we'll share out the recording afterwards. So if people do miss a few minutes at the beginning or the end, you can watch it back. But we also want to make sure we leave time for questions and answers as well. So if you do have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. And if it's quick, we might get to it kind of in the flow of the presentation, or if not, we'll get to it at the end, or we'll try to get through as many as we can in the allotted time here. Um, so yeah, but yeah, I think with that, Riley, if you want to share your screen and get ready to jump into it, sounds good.
All right, let's do it. Oh, you should be able to see my screen. Can I get a thumbs up, Zach, on
Yep,
that?
looks good.
Okay,
Awesome.
great. Well, excited to be here with everybody for our what's now become our annual tradition of it's like my favorite holiday tradition nowadays is giving my sort of next year's predictions on how the digital ID landscape will evolve. Um, and yeah, this year is no different. This year. Santa's been good to us or whatever, right? Because we've got a lot of goodies to cover today. Um, so first, I think yeah, introductions, trends from 2025. So this is sort of recapping what we predicted last year and then kind of how the landscape actually played out. Um, there are some launches that I think we'll be paying attention to that we expect to launch in 2026. And then we've got some predictions to make, um, which is fun because these predictions, some of which are pretty, like, I think we feel pretty strongly about, and other ones are a bit of a shot in the dark, and we've blended them all together, so you'll have no idea which ones are which, and that's part of the fun of it. So in terms of introductions, I want to mention what Trinsic does for anybody who's new or anybody who's just watching this afterward who doesn't already know. Today, identity verification, generally speaking, is done by taking a picture of a plastic card and a selfie and uploading those for verification, right? And in the best case scenario, it's takes like 50 seconds or something. And it's a cat and mouse game between the AI driven fraudsters who are trying to get better and better at making fake documents and biometric deep fakes and things like that all the time, and the companies who are fighting the fraud. And so that's the state of the identity verification industry today. And I think tomorrow it'll look a little more like double tap from your from your iPhone or your fingerprint on your screen on your Android or whatever the case may be, or you're redirected out to your identity wallet and you consent to share your data that way. And not only is this superior from a privacy standpoint, but it's a great user experience as well. So what Trinsic does is we connect to a whole bunch of different sources of digital ID. Typically, these are wallets. Sometimes they are what you might call a cloud-based wallet or something, right? Where it's like you have an account or a wallet in the cloud somewhere, and you're redirected out through your web browser to authenticate to it. And other times, in certain parts of the world, they may have government biometric registries or databases that um, that allow businesses to authenticate their users. But either way, Trinsic sort of aggregates these and makes them available through one API. And over the last year, we've been busy integrating lots of digital IDs. This kind of shows the timeline for when these have been added to the platform. And um, we're busy over here, right? Because digital IDs are not only growing quickly where they are adopted, but there are new ones launching all the time. And figuring out how to adopt them is complicated because, like the mapping between concepts is not perfectly clear, right? So it's not like there's like one digital ID per country or something. If there was, that would be much easier to reason about. But something like Apple Wallet, there are it exists in the US, but not everywhere in the US. It's only in whatever 15 states or something, right? And it also exists in Japan, but only for a certain type, credential type. And some EIDs cover multiple countries, like EUDI, for example, in the UK has coverage or has users in the US and France and Italy and Netherlands, beyond just the UK. But it's primarily, most of its adoption is in the UK. And so it's like, how do you reason about this stuff? This stuff is complicated. This is what Trinsic tries to help with, both in terms of the information about digital IDs, as well as the technical integration and the legal and governance framework implications on using these. So last year, when we did this kind of predictions webinar or whatever, we were tracking 220 digital IDs around the world. Today, we're tracking 297. So this has become quite a task to track all these things. But it shows the kind of growth of just new digital IDs that are coming online around the world. We could break down digital ID into EIDs from governments, re-IDs or reusable IDs from the private sector, and usually bank IDs. We sort of separate those out into their own category because it's maybe a private sector, but very heavily regulated, so it's very government influenced or whatever. So it's a bit of a hybrid, and these are sort of bank IDs around the world. Certainly have quite a bit of adoption as well. Okay, well, let's get into the predictions from last year. Some of these are a bit vanilla, and I've tried to spice these up this year to make them a little more entertaining, hopefully. But if you read through these, I think these predictions are generally pretty good. I mean, if you look at more businesses accepting digital IDs, that's certainly true. 25 states with live MDLs with remote verification. That was a strong. It's like I'm glad we made that prediction. In reality, there are 22 states with a live MDL right now. And by the way, there would have been 25 if certain MDL programs had persisted, but there are certain states that have, are switching vendors or are temporarily paused the MDL program or are going to relaunch it in 2026 or something like that, where so there have been 25 states do an MDL ever. But today, there are 22 that are live. And of that, only 16 or 17 of them support remote verification in some form. So while this was a good prediction directionally, it's certainly we're not quite there. And then I think on the EIDIS point, right? We can point to some countries which are launching wallets, EUDI or EIDIS 2.0 kind of style wallets early, which are maybe don't exactly have a lot of adoption yet, but are sort of launching early. And I think it's probably that second to last bullet point as well is pretty on point, that it's pretty rare to find an ID verification company right now that doesn't have some form of a reusable ID incorporated into their platform. So what we did to identify some of these trends. So every week or two, I think it's every 2 weeks. Anyway, Zach, you can correct me in the chat or something. But every week or two, we send out a newsletter that recaps sort of what's happening in the digital ID space. And if you're not subscribed to this newsletter, I encourage you to go subscribe. It's just a really quick read that just recaps the big points that probably are going to be interesting to you. Certainly, if you're here at this webinar. Um, it's called the Future of Identity newsletter. Find it on our website. And basically, what we did is we took all the webinars from, all the newsletters from 2025 and fed them into our friend Chat GPT and asked it to pull out the trends, right? So if you had to pull out the trends from these, what would they be? And here are the trends, right? So I can walk through these in some subsequent slides here. First one is mobile IDs becoming core infrastructure. There are, across the US and globally, physical IDs are moving to digital, and it's not necessarily moving in a uniform way. The way that this is taking place is happening differently in different places and with different types of credentials, but is certainly happening with launches, basically every week. Next one is that reusable identity networks are consolidating. So from kind of consolidation in the just general identity verification landscape of companies to sort of companies focusing on expanding the offering from maybe being more of a point solution to starting to offer more elements of digital IDs from issuance all the way to acceptance. This has certainly been a trend to follow as well with things like Plaid offering expanding the capabilities of their reusable ID, Persona launching not only reusable personas, which has been done in the past, but also the new Persona Connect product, as well as companies like Ondado and Shufti and others releasing reusable age verification. Jumio recently released one. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on down the list. Talking about the kinds of solutions that are out here, but it certainly is. Again, every week it seems like there's more news in this direction. The other point is that as AI becomes more and more capable, the question of who's behind the AI becomes more and more sort of on point. And I think recently that this year at the AMVA Global Conference in Phoenix, Trinsic attended with one of our partners at Indeed, showing how Indeed was able to use MDLs in connection with some of the AI-related things that they're doing to accept candidates and verify candidates are who they say they are, and that it's actually the right person submitting the resume or whatever. This is one example of many, many, many launches or sort of demonstrations that we've seen throughout the last year in this vein. You look no further than in September at GBG's global kind of customer conference, they had a whole panel and showcase around agentic AI and building trust in agentic AI workflows. At Money 2020, Encode released a agentic AI kind of ID verification tool. And Vouched is another ID verification company that's making really strong moves into this agentic AI space with a whole KYA framework and with MDLs and digital IDs at the forefront of the merger between the AI agent, the new needs that emerge in this new agentic world with the expectations of consumer convenience and user experience that people have coming into this as well. So these are some areas that would be really worth looking at, and I think again constantly seeing trends in this space. The next one is that although the core kind of when we started Trinsic in 2019, we were a verifiable credential platform, right? Our customers all used us to issue verifiable credentials. Today, we are used for accepting digital IDs, whether they're based on standard credentials or not. So Trinsic has evolved a little bit, but it's cool to see in this last little while how it seems like the original premise that Trinsic started off with in 2019 is starting to come more to fruition with places like Costa Rica launching with a privacy-preserving digital credential infrastructure. Singapore with SingPass, talking about migrating or upgrading their infrastructure to use MDocs instead of the sort of traditional OIDC type infrastructure that's in production today. As well as we can look all over the Ukraine, right, with the Dia app as well, and the adoption that has, and the strength of that. I mean, we're seeing sort of privacy first, user centric, uh, uh, storage on user device type digital IDs, uh, growing much more quickly recently than I think we certainly did in the past, which is awesome. Makes me super happy. Uh, and then the next one is, I think there's a strong kind of, as in the political realm, we see kind of, nationalism, and we see many other trends that are above my pay grade to get into here, obviously, kind of emerging around the world. And as a part of that, we see kind of identity infrastructure being viewed as a sovereign thing, or a national security, national infrastructure, type of a thing, right? So what we end up seeing is basically international hesitancy toward um, delegating the entire national ID infrastructure to an American tech company, for example, like an Apple or a Google. Um, and so we see really a lot of um, nation state level interest in building strong uh, identity systems that are sovereign and independent to them, that can persist without reliance on the current global order. And most of these are based on standards to some degree, with varying standards, varying degrees there. Um, uh, but it certainly is the case that uh, nations around the world are moving in this direction, and it's not necessarily all in the exact same path, right? So same direction, different path, maybe is how I would frame that. So that's a recap of the predictions we made last year and the trends that we're seeing right now. Next, I want to talk about the launches that we expect to see in 2026, and that we're really highly anticipating. So the first category here is EUDI. This is probably an obvious one, where um, you know the end of 2026 is when each EU member state country is supposed to have its own EUDI wallet shipped in production. And I think we'll get into exactly how I think that'll go here in the predictions section of the webinar in a little bit later. But suffice it to say, I mean, there's certainly going to be news in this vein. And it's going to be big news because everybody's paying attention to this. Everybody's looking at this as a model that, a lot of the rest of the world is going to certainly be influenced by. And um, and there will definitely be, I think, countries that launch wallets aligned to the UDI specifications. And it'll be really, really, really interesting to pay close attention to how those get adopted by users. Um, to the extent that users, if we see these things just ripping in terms of their adoption, that is going to really encourage other countries to follow suit. It's going to really encourage relying party adoption. Of course, these things are related, right? You need relying parties to accept them in order for consumers to want to go get them. But at any rate, it'll be interesting to see exactly how the early EUDI launches play out. I think we have a slide on this. Yeah, we do. So this is a slide kind of showing where things are at, the sort of kind of whether there is an EUDI wallet there or not, and kind of how it's developing. And so yeah, I think I'll just leave this up here for just a minute. Shout out to the I have my Zoom, my screen sharing thing is blocking the name of the company right here, but I bet you can't see my Zoom screen sharing thing, so you can see the university that published this. So shout out to them. Okay, the next bullet point here is the about mobile driver's licenses and specifically the ISO 18013-7 specification, uh, which was recently finalized and I think is certainly being implemented in and a lot of eyeballs on this around the world, because what this standard enables is for MDLs to be used online. So instead of just using them in person at like an airport, for example, where there is specialized hardware and NFC, Bluetooth readers, and all of that, um, you can just present it to a website, and the website can handle all that stuff. And then there's no specialized hardware needed. You can just use cloud-based infrastructure like Trinsic to accept and validate those MDLs. So it's really, uh, it's going to be an exciting development, and I think 2026 is going to be the year that this standard takes off in the US and Australia. These are the two geographies that I'm really paying attention to. I think Australia is really interesting because there are a lot of MDLs in circulation, or I should say, there are a lot of digitized driver's licenses in circulation. Certainly, most of which are not based on the MDL standards, but that are moving to those standards. And we recently did a podcast with Chris Go, who is very active in that part of the world and very involved in that ecosystem. And we did a deep dive into this. But I think in 2026, this will be the year that Australia, not only becomes more standards based, but also begins adopting the remote verification specifications. And in the US, we have this graphic that shows kind of the historical growth rate over time of new states launching. And this is our sort of prediction, and we're sort of holding out for a few of these here in the 2025 column. So we'll see what gets over the line before the end of the year on this. So the next bullet point that I want to talk about is the Gov UK wallet. This is really interesting because there has been probably nowhere on planet Earth with more news and fervor and excitement and trepidation and anxiety and emotion about digital ID than has been in the UK. And that is because of announcements made by new political leadership, and it's certainly become very politicized. Certainly has been a big topic there. But the Gov UK wallet is sort of independent of that. I mean, it's like this wallet app is going to allow people to get their driver's license, mobile driver's license. Already, people can get their veterans card in this wallet, and it will support remote verification and use cases for proving one's identity in the private sector. So there's sort of obviously a big, a lot of people paying attention, a lot of conversation about this potential centralized digital ID that will come in a few years or something. But I think, what's happening right now is that there's, regardless of whether that even happens, right? Like maybe that doesn't even happen, who knows? But like regardless of whether that happens, like this is happening. The Gov UK wallet is happening with digital credentials. And I don't think there's really any objection to this, because it's just like, it's like we already have a driver's license, might as well get it on your, get it digitally as well. And so so that's exciting. We're excited to watch how that develops as well. And then the remainder of kind of private sector IDVs that don't already have reusable ID or accept digital IDs, I think will be very likely to begin doing so in 2026. Okay, now we have gotten to the point of the webinar where I pull out my crystal ball. I should have like bought like a crystal ball on Amazon or something and had like a prop here. That would have been fun. But this is the part of the webinar where I get to have a little bit of fun and wear my prognostication hat and predict how this landscape will evolve. Some of these predictions are, I feel pretty confident in. I think are actually good predictions and maybe a little contrarian. So maybe not everyone would agree with me, but I think they're at least interesting predictions. Other ones are a bit of a shot in the dark. So let's see, how this plays out. So my first prediction is that As AI agents become increasingly capable, trustworthiness online will be a central topic in the zeitgeist. So what I predict, this is a bit of a fuzzy one. There's no real way to like measure this objectively. So I will just state that I think if some um, AI CEO or identity company CEO sits on Good Morning America or uh, a show like that and talks about how digital ID is important for, as AI becomes increasingly capable and scams and fraud become more and more of a problem, that will mean that this prediction, has come true. The other piece of this is I think that this will drive a lot of attention into the identity industry, but I do not think that it will necessarily drive a ton of 2026 volume. But I do think it will be a major contributor to 2027 and beyond. That is my current thinking. Okay, let's go North America. I've got a couple predictions, for my continent. My first prediction is that Apple Wallet will expand into Canada and will not expand into any new countries, any other ones, right? So like sort of they're already in Japan, US, expanded into Canada. Um, this is not based on any information. This is one this is one of those ones. It's a bit of a shot in the dark. I have no insider knowledge here. But I think the underneath this, I think it is the case that if you are an organization whose strategy is to focus on adopting Apple and Google wallets and ignore the other digital IDs that exist, I think you would be wise to rethink that strategy, right? Because I think, regardless of whether this specific prediction is true, um, I don't think Apple is going to be in every country or anywhere close to it in 2026. Okay, my next prediction is that MDL in the US will be politicized and scapegoated during the midterm elections for reasons related to voter ID laws. Now, I hope that this prediction is wrong, but alas, I think it is more likely than not, maybe, that one side of the aisle or another will, and I think it's like a coin toss as to who. Like I could literally steelman the case for either side of the aisle, basically, calling this out, and then of course this like reflexively, I think the other side will immediately kind of take the other point of view because, of course, there's this, you can't like agree on something, right? That would be crazy. But I think there will be like tension and related to in this vein, and I'm not sure yet whether that'll be good for MDL and digital ID generally, because on the one hand, attention and relevance is something that these things need in order to be adopted. On the other hand, politicizing stuff is, I don't know, turns it into like, it's like you don't want relying parties to fear signaling a political persuasion based on which digital IDs they choose to support or something. So we'll see how this plays out. I'll be really interested in watching this. Okay, my next prediction is that one additional state will join my lovely home of Utah in its alternative push to MDLs. So Utah does have an MDL. I have it here on my phone. But Utah is planning a what they call state endorsed digital identity, which is a state issued digital ID as opposed to a DMV issued driver's license, right? And it's a sort of a foundational identity that is issued by the state, but they would prefer the term endorsed by the state, right? So it's not like the state comes up with your identity, you already have one. The state simply stamps and endorses that identity and gives it to you. It's very much more inspired by the decentralized identity crowd and the and I think that my prediction is that this will start a cascade of fragmentation because it reminds me a little bit in 2019 when we started Trinsic. Everybody agreed that W3C verifiable credentials were the thing. It seemed like consensus. right? And there were a couple different standards. It's true that there was not only one, but they were at least written into the W3C specification. Um, but then as soon as some defectors started splitting, then this prisoner's dilemma scenario kicked in, where like if everybody agrees on the standard, then nobody has an incentive to defect. But then if Microsoft starts doing something different than what MasterCard was doing, then all of a sudden Workday decides to do even a different thing, and Block, TBD decides to do a different thing, and pretty soon you're in the space we're in now, where there's 20 different verifiable credential standards or whatever, and there's not a single consolidated sort of set of standards that everybody agrees on or is implementing. And I fear a similar thing will happen here. So this is another prediction I hope doesn't come true, but alas, I think that's my prediction. Okay, predictions for Europe. My first prediction here is that only half of the EU member state countries will meet the end of 2026 deadline for EUDI. I think this is another way of saying this is, half of EU member state countries won't have an EUDI wallet by the end of the year. This is also not based on tons of insider information, right? I'm not talking to the, administrators of every EU member state country and sort of tallying up who is likeliest to, launch by the end of 2026 or whatever. This is based on a broad pattern recognition for example, when the Australian states were supposed to launch their MDLs and when they actually are, when the US states were supposed to launch with the -7 remote verification specification and when they actually are, right? And just how long these things tend to take. Yeah, this is my prediction, and I expect that questions like who can verify these credentials? How will registration happen? Will reciprocity exist between different countries' registration processes for relying parties? And does that mean that every international relying party is just going to go get registered in Malta or something because it's like got a less stringent process? Or how will integrators or non-governmental issuers get paid? Or non-government wallet providers get certified, or and the business model for them, right? I think there's going to be a lot of questions that remain unanswered, and will be interesting to see sort of how that plays out. My next prediction is that five EU countries will have at least 10 million users of EUDI wallets. Or if they're a small country who only has 10 million people to begin with, then I'll say sort of greater than 80% adoption in those scenarios. So and the reason for this is because my bet is that Europe is a fantastic place to focus on EID adoption, but not for the reason that most people think. I think the majority of EUDI wallets with a lot of users will be existing digital IDs, such as It's Me in Belgium, or products like that already have a lot of users and that upgrade their solutions and their systems to the EUDI specifications. And I think the consensus view is that we should wait for EUDI to come, right, and sort of adopt EUDI when it's out there. And I think that people with that point of view will lag behind people who instead take this contrarian position that I'm making here, which is that the digital IDs that are already out there are and already being used will, number one, continue to be used even after the EUDI wallet comes out. I mean, there's going to be some period of time where those existing IDs remain relevant on the one hand, and then on the other hand, many of those existing digital IDs will simply upgrade their standards to EUDI. They'll issue new credentials. They'll ask users to download the app, and bada bing, bada boom. Before users know it, they have a compliant wallet. And if you've integrated it now, then you'll get the benefit of it now instead of waiting for a year and a half for all this to come to be. So that's my prediction here. And this is pretty compelling, right? I mean, 50 million users with this kind of a wallet, that is a massive growth of standards-based, user-centric kind of wallet applications versus where the world is today. So if this comes true, that will be tremendous. This will be the best year of in history for privacy-preserving digital ID. Okay, my next prediction is that in the UK, private reusable ID solutions will be the sort of dominant the dominant solutions as even as the government kind of relaxes its rhetoric about the digital ID being mandatory or compulsory in order to work. So my prediction is basically twofold here: that number one, that rhetoric will cool off, and that the reality of this digital ID will not be that it's actually compulsory or whatever. Uh, and secondarily, that like the damage has already been done, and that this is a great opportunity for private sector companies to enter the picture, to be certified under the DIADA framework. And I wanted to make the prediction that government services would begin to accept DIADA certified reusable ID wallets. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I mean, maybe I should have made that as the prediction here. But I do think that's probably a bit of a stretch. But I do think it's um, likely that private reusable ID companies are the dominant form of reusable ID in the UK, and that if you are looking at accepting digital IDs in the UK, you'll need to consider private reusable IDs in your strategy, not just the Gov UK wallet or things like that. Okay, beyond North America, beyond Europe, let's talk about the rest of the world and some more general predictions here. My first one is that um, every identity company is going to be supporting digital IDs. I think that is not even a prediction. That's just an inevitability. But the prediction is that the digital ID or the sort of KYC, IDV, IAM type platforms that have strong orchestration capabilities will win the sort of big, important deals in the space. So this is things like biometric matching, address verification, fallback document verifications, video IDV, risk signals, and behavioral biometrics, right? Like all these other tools that companies may want to bring to bear in the world of digital IDs. I mean, I can say that these wallet-based and verifiable credential-based solutions are not the end all be all for ID verification or KYC. They do not by themselves solve for all use cases. So real relying parties, right? Like cross-border, like a Robinhood or Airbnb or these types of companies, they will need other solutions brought to bear to bolster the areas where digital IDs maybe don't fully meet their requirements in a given scenario. And so the IDVs that have strong product execution on orchestrating digital IDs alongside traditional forms of ID verification are going to be in a very good position. Okay, my next prediction is that 50% of MDL adoption globally will be in jurisdiction-specific apps. So by MDL here, I mean, ISO standard digitized driver's licenses, right? So I mean, not necessarily MDoc, not necessarily all verifiable credentials that you can imagine, but specifically MDLs. And today, when we do a breakdown of the number of MDLs that are issued out in the wild, 50% of them are issued to OEM wallets like Apple, Google, Samsung, and 50% are issued into the 20-something, jurisdiction-specific wallet apps in these various states, countries, etc. So right now, the breakdown of MDL adoption is 50-50. My prediction is that by the end of 2026, despite a lot of growth, the breakdown will still be 50-50. Right? So I think sort of the reason that maybe matters for you is if you want to offer, if you want to accept users from whatever they have, you'll probably want a strategy beyond Apple, Google, and Samsung. Um, uh, yeah, that's I guess my prediction there. And at the same time, my prediction is that Google Wallet will be the number one ID wallet on Earth by adoption by the end of the year. And I think this is like maybe not that bold of a prediction because if you look at Android adoption, you look at the defaults, um, you consider global expansion, right? Google has been very involved in the EUDI stuff, and they support this, in Germany, an age verification credential from a bank, for example, from things like that all the way to MDLs in the US, all the way to their ID pass credential, which is a derived credential from a passport chip. Uh, I think it's very likely that Google Wallet is the number one wallet on Earth in terms of the number of credentials and users. And again, this is not actually maybe that bold because what if you think about what is the number one ID wallet on Earth by adoption today? I mean, it maybe depends on how you define ID wallet, right? But like, would it be ID.me in the US with 70 million, strongly verified users, 130 million more broadly kind of accounts or whatever with some form of credential in them. Um, it depends on how you define that, but yeah, that's the prediction. Okay, we're getting close to the end. These last few predictions here. Uh, I think I already have that one, right? Yes, I have the same slide twice, but I wrote it in different words, it looks like. All right, well, that saves us one slide. The next prediction is 1 billion new people. So people who don't currently have the ability to get access to a wallet-based ID will get access or be eligible for a sort of wallet-based digital ID thanks to biometric databases moving in the direction of user control. Right, so I'm thinking places like Ethiopia now does offer a wallet-based digital ID that Trinsic supports, and this is sort of how this came about, right? It was sort of they had a biometric government registry of their citizens. They then offer a wallet app to consumers to basically sort of um, democratize ownership of that and allow consumers to share that information in a more user-centric way. The same thing is happening right now in a variety of other countries, and to varying degrees. I don't know if you would really say that people in the Philippines currently are eligible for a wallet-based ID, given that the eGov app in the Philippines isn't exactly you can't exactly sort of share your credential from that app in a standardized way or in a remote verification kind of a scenario very easily without calling back to the government source. So, but I think 2026 is the year where that will happen, right? And so there will be these very populous geographies that get some sort of wallet-based ID access, and that the number of people who are eligible for digital IDs will skyrocket. I think this is my last prediction. Let's see. Yes, my last prediction here. So get your Q&As ready, and this is probably the spiciest prediction of them all. But my prediction here is that in 2026, privacy advocates and the push for a maximalist privacy posture with respect to digital IDs will have a net negative impact on privacy. So in other words, the advocating for more privacy will result in less privacy. The reason that I am predicting this is because what I have seen in my own state of Utah and elsewhere around the world is that a focus on perfection with respect to privacy and a maximalist point of view here ultimately results in less progress for digital IDs. Part of that is because people are not educated on how these things all work, and so there's a fear, there's a distrust, probably rightfully so, of these digital solutions and of their privacy, and so there's hesitancy there. In the meantime, what that means is that, you know, um, people don't get to do selective disclosure and share only the attributes that are relevant for that scenario. Instead, they need to take a high resolution photograph of their most sensitive government documents, a liveness biometric selfie, video that is sent off to third parties for processing, retention for who knows how long, potentially years for fraud prevention purposes. Maybe they save your biometric template for deduplication purposes, and they maybe train their AI model on your image of your document or something. I mean, this is pretty standard stuff. It's not like that. Those things are inherently wrong intrinsically. But if you're looking at it from the lens of a privacy point of view, um, the net impact of allowing users to use a digital ID versus the status quo of picture of plastic ID, um, the digital ID is far superior from a privacy standpoint. And um, and I think like regulators will fill the gap here in geographies like Italy and Brazil and um, in some ways the U.S. and in some ways a variety of other countries. Um, uh, Using your EID for certain things, like in Italy, using your SPID for gaming and gambling, for example, is explicitly allowed and like sanctioned by the regulator of that industry, which sort of facilitates adoption in that space. And so I think while so I think regulators will fill the gap here to the extent that it needs to be, right? In for example, in scenarios where it's like in the gambling industry, like you shouldn't be fully anonymous or something, right? And so the regulator will say, like, here you go, here's the things that you should do to accept users here, um, and fill the gap there. That said, I do think the privacy advocating for privacy is good, and it does push existing EIDs to adopt stronger privacy practices, which is on balance a very good thing also. So both things are true. But my 2026 prediction is as it's stated here on the slide. That doesn't mean that it'll be net negative impact over the long term, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It just means that it will be net negative impact in 2026. Okay, those are our predictions. So uh, if anybody wants to sort of you know put all these predictions on Polymarket, and we can start a prediction market or betting on this stuff, then we can all use our digital IDs to onboard into Polymarket and KYC there and whatever, and start uh you know see what we all think about it. But anyway, I'll pause here. It's I think time for the Q&A.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Riley. There's a few questions in here, so I will kind of tee a few of these up. And if other people have questions, again, we have some time, so feel free to put them in into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. First question here is about security, which is a question that we get kind of frequently. Basically, emerging technologies like a digital ID or an MDL maybe have like a less proven security model, or there just aren't as many out there. It hasn't been in the wild. So, do you think that we're going to see a lot of like new types of attacks or fraud vectors on these new EIDs, or how do you see that comparing to, you know, fraud and attack vectors in existing identity verification processes?
Yeah. Yeah, this is an interesting question. This is a good one for a predictions webinar because I don't know. So I'll just have to predict, right? It's best guess kind of thing. Uh, I think it's very likely that the assumption behind the question is true, that not like any new technology or any new solutions have new attack vectors and elements that are unproven or still being worked out or whatever. And if and I don't think it's possible to have something where every security implication is all worked out unless you deploy it and like battle test it against the world or something, right? So I think this is like expected. Um, and so my prediction here is that um, uh, my prediction here is that in 2026, digital IDs will be used more as a good signal for good users than as a preventing bad users, if that makes sense. Um, and the reason I think that is because most digital IDs, I mean, you can usually kind of dial this in with your level of assurance that you want to set for accepting digital IDs, at least through Trinsic. But the level of authentication into a digital ID is relatively strong. And so it's a pretty good signal on, if you use your MDL from your Apple Wallet or something, that's a pretty good signal that you are the same user that enrolled in that digital ID, and that the enrollment was pretty strong as well. So that's a good signal that you are a good user. If you are a bad user, I don't think you'll try that. I don't think necessarily. I mean, I think it's like not scalable. It's much harder to kind of attack that vector, like the digital ID vector at scale. So I think in 2026, the primary form of fraud will still be sort of, oh, I don't have a digital ID. Let me try to go through the other way. And then there's sort of many more gaps and like larger gaps in that world than there is in the other one. The bar is much lower, I think. Um, but it's a really good question. That's just my prediction.
Awesome. Yeah, great question. So yeah, keep them coming. If others have questions here, I think one that's maybe a quick one was just a clarification on Apple Wallet expanding into Canada. Um, Functionality may be limited in some cases due to
Mm,
data concerns. So
yeah.
there, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. My prediction about Apple Wallet was that it would expand into Canada. And what I mean by that, I should have probably clarified and been more specific. What I mean is that Apple Wallet will begin supporting um, new ID cards in Apple Wallet, not necessarily payment cards, new ID cards, such as I don't know, like a provincial ID, or a digital driver's license, an MDL, in at least one jurisdiction within Canada in 2026. Um, Again, it's a bit of a long shot. I have no evidence that that's true. It's just I kind of wanted to throw in a few long shot predictions here, and so that was one of them. Uh, an alternative prediction would be something like, Apple Wallet goes into the UK or Apple Wallet goes into Australia, right? Which are other geographies that are supporting the MDoc specification and that are issuing into their own wallets, or whatever. So it would probably be a more reasonable prediction to look at probably either the UK or Australia, but I wanted to be a little bit bold today, so I went for Canada.
Awesome. Another question here is related to using a digital ID. Basically, how do you keep track of bad actors or fraud with a digital ID, given that there's a lot of push for, like anonymization or not retaining data, and sometimes those things come in conflict with regulation, where you need to know from a, financial crime perspective, who is moving money, on and off of a platform or into a
Yeah.
bank or something like that. So, I guess if you want to speak a little bit just to how that changes with the digital ID, how it's, more privacy preserving
Yes.
than current status quo.
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the specific language used in the question is basically, how is this, going to work if the system is meant to be anonymized, right? And I think that when we talk about privacy preserving, anonymous or anonymization typically is comes up as like a uh, assumption about what that means. But I think that actually privacy is not about being anonymous. It is about proving who I am when I want to prove who I am. It's about control. It's about borders and boundaries and control. So I do want my bank to know it's me when I call them, right? I don't want someone else to be able to call my bank and just be able to like know my bank balance or something. I don't want that. I want to be known and prove it's me, when I want to prove it's me, right? So what I think the key is with these digital IDs is that they're not exactly meant to be anonymous per se, although they can be in scenarios where anonymization is appropriate, but rather they're meant to only share the relevant data for that transaction specifically, right? And so, in other words, in order to comply with regulation, in order to prevent fraud, in order to um, do business, you'll need to know information about that user. And that information, if it comes from a digital ID, has some level of trustworthiness associated with it. And that's totally within the realm of how these digital IDs work. Um, for example, you can still sort of deduplicate users. You can do a biometric match in real time to make sure that this is the right user for this credential. You could store that in a safe way or whatever, but then when the user comes back, still be able to kind of address that. So there's things like that that you can do that would uh that I think these things are very compatible, right? Regulatory compliance, collecting the data you need, and also privacy preserving digital IDs. These are all work together.
Awesome. All right. Well, we have just 3 minutes left and some questions that will certainly take more than 3 minutes to answer. So
Hmm.
let's see if there's one more maybe we want to fit in before the top of the hour here. I do think I think let's talk a little bit about levels of assurance or standardization efforts. Globally, right? So you have like EU frameworks and you have trust frameworks being, stood up in Canada and New Zealand and other parts of the world. So I'm curious, Riley, just to get your thoughts just on the first part of the question around greater standardization on the idea of like a level of assurance when presenting a digital ID. This is a question that comes up a lot, and
Yeah.
I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah. I think that right now their digital IDs are fragmented in more ways than one. They are fragmented in terms of the standards that are used technically. They're fragmented in terms of the standards that are used to express the level of assurance associated. In
Mhm.
the UK, there's a really robust and sort of honestly complicated regime that governs level of assurance, right, with GBG 45. Um, in the UK, there's um, the NIST framework, IAL with AAL as another dimension on that, which is maybe more simplistic, less expressive, but easier to maybe get your head around or something. And these two frameworks do not map one to one, let alone the frameworks in the EU and Canada and New Zealand and whatever. So my thoughts around standardizing this, I don't know. I'm not optimistic that these things will just be standardized in some near-term time frame. So, what we do at Trinsic is we sort of try to normalize these things and get underneath the like abstraction, the standard, whatever, get into the nuts and bolts of like how is this done under the hood, and then map that to a common framework that we express. So for each digital ID, we basically put a Trinsic level of assurance score on it, which is an informational kind of uh, you know, a bit of information about that digital ID. Um, and then we also attach the sort of issuer professed or wallet professed level of assurance in terms of the local framework as well. Um, but yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know I think I'm not optimistic that will be solved in 2026 here.
No, there's been some great efforts around mapping trust frameworks to each other, but like you said, it's a complicated thing to reason about on a global perspective. So, I think with that, there's a few other ones, but I want to respect everybody's time and kind of wrap up the webinar here. We will send out the recording to everybody who's registered. So if you have colleagues that missed it, or if you missed a portion of it, you can get the recording via email after this. And if you have additional questions, you can reach us, via email, LinkedIn, Slack, and we're happy to chat more. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.